We have to do a lot more than restoring the same status quo that got into this mess in the first place. We will fight for a simple reason, because we love our country and the core promise it made to us, that the law doesn't belong to kings or billionaires or corporations. It belongs to us. These are the central themes of the work we do at Court Accountability Action, the conversations we have here on Midas Touch Legal AF. And these are lines from a political ad from an incredibly exciting new candidate for Attorney General of Colorado. Our guest today, I'm so thrilled to have him here. A guy I met just recently at a convening, a true champion for justice, democracy, one of the nation's leading labor and workers' rights lawyers, anti-monopoly consumer protection work, but that he does it as the executive director of an incredible organization called Towards Justice. David Seligman, congrats on your launch. Thank you for jumping into this race and fighting for your state, fighting for our country, and for your career of fighting for everyday people in the face of autocracy and oligarchy. Welcome to Midas Touch Legal AF.
It's awesome to be here, really. Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the show, so it's good to be on.
Excellent. So I want to get into your work at Towards Justice for sure, but what drove you to throw your hat in the ring, to run for office? I think it's something that a lot of folks think about doing. They look at our elected officials, they say, I could do a better job of that. But it's a big task to do it. It takes a lot of courage and bravery. It's a lot of work. What compelled you to throw your hat in the ring for Colorado AG?
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, like fundamentally, I sort of got to a point where I was tired of leaving some of the most important parts of our project up to others. You know what I mean? Like I felt like, I have spent my career fighting for working people, standing up and trying to help them enforce the laws, right? To bring like meaning to the laws for them, right? And then, but so much of that, it was like part of the back and forth of our like democracy, right? And like dealing with the whiplash of changing administrations and political discourse and debate. And I was just like tired of leaving the most important parts of my project up to others, up to, in some cases, like political hacks, right? I mean, not to say that there aren't like good people in politics. There are lots of really good people in politics, but I was like tired of not being part of that project, right? And felt like I had to be. Like this is like really an extension of this work, right? I see with the AG's office in particular, right? I see how important that office can be in leveling the playing field, in taking on concentrated wealth and power. It has all of the tools, and I felt compelled to engage in the conversation and to talk to people about that. I mean, fundamentally, the goal of running for office is to win, right? It is to win and to make government work the way that we know it can, to make people's lives easier and better. But the job of a candidate is also to run. It's to campaign. It's to talk to people about things. And that's also part of what sort of compelled me to do this work too, right? I wanted to go to the county party picnics and talk to people about forced arbitration, and talk to people about political corruption, and talk to people about what the AG's office can do. And I'll tell you, some parts of the job of running really suck, right? And they are like totally deflating and dispiriting in all kinds of ways. And it's like a real window into our democracy and how it's sort of dysfunction. But also there's some really like amazing things that I've just loved so much, which is like getting out there and actually talking to people. Campaigning is really cool and fun.
Yeah. And that's been what's really shown through in all of the content you're putting out there. It's been really great. You're like out on the streets, you're outside Denver Nuggets games, talking to people about, the world and their government and how it's serving them or not, increasingly not. And there's this interesting dynamic, as a former Senate staffer, being up close and personal with these national elected officials. There's this problem, right? It's like I don't know exactly how to describe it, but there's a self-selection that occurs with folks that want to have that type of high office, and they becomes so consultant driven and polished, and everything they say is has been scrubbed through the PR cleaner, and it results in a political class that is disconnected increasingly from everyday people, and the entire attitude of your campaign feels like just the absolute opposite of that. What have you learned from your you're not your constituents, hopefully soon, but from the folks in your community as you engage with them about these issues, as you tell them about the work of an AG's office and what's at stake in this election.
Total. So first, let me just say, I appreciate you saying that so much about the campaign. That's something that I've really tried to commit myself to, right? It's
fun to watch them. They're really fun.
Yeah. Videos. Yeah. So I would say it's really running for office is weird. And yeah, it's scary. You're really putting yourself out there, right? Especially as a lawyer, right? Where we spend our careers, sure, our name is at the bottom of the brief, but we are not the parties to the lawsuit, right? We are fighting for others. It's weird to see your name on a freaking sign, you know what I mean, in a logo, right? It's weird, and hard. And getting over that has been a challenge for me. I mean, I think that I've got some secret powers here, right? One of them is very genuinely, I tell people this all the time, very genuinely, the people that I have fought for throughout my career, the people I've represented, they have had to deal with way worse stuff, way greater indignities than I'll have to put up with any day of this campaign, right? I've represented people who have never been involved in the legal system and have risked everything, right, to take on the biggest corporations in the world. And so that's something that I can tap into, right? When I'm doing call time and asking people for money, I can think about the people I've represented who, were doing call center work, and dealing with their minute by minute surveillance. And when I'm driving around the state, I can think about all the truck drivers and delivery drivers I've represented. But here's the other thing, which I think is really, I've started to realize is how important this is that my identity isn't bound up with winning this race, right? My identity is bound up with doing the work, right? And so I can be authentic, right, and speak to the things that I want to fight for without fear that if I lose, right, that I lose something core to me, right? This is about the project that I've been involved in for a really long time. That's been a sort of a fun thing about running for office. Me as an outsider who's new to politics, but has been really fundamentally doing the work for a really long time. To answer your actual question, look, there I am. I'm being a politician. I'm answering some other question. You know what I mean? But finally getting around to yours. I'm learning, I guess. To answer your actual question, what are people saying? People are really scared, right? And they're also feeling really squeezed and screwed over. So they're scared about the future of our country, and everybody wants to save our country, and everybody's extremely concerned about what they see as really some dire threats to our democracy, to the rule of law, and those kinds of things. And yet also I feel there's a different kind of flavor to the conversation now than I experienced in 2017, for example, right? I think that there is a much deeper awareness and sharper concern for not just Donald Trump, but also the conditions that gave us Donald Trump, right? For what I think of as the oligarchy, for concentrated wealth and power. There is a real concern for those things, and you feel it all over the place, and really up and down the sort of economic spectrum, right? Even from people who are more well off, appreciate that there is something deeply screwed up about our country and how it has been overtaken by a billionaire class that has tried to rig the rules against them. That discussion, right, is very different from, I think, the conversation that we were having in 2017. And I think it's driven not just because people are reading more or listening to more podcasts. I think it's because people really see it in their lives, right? And people really feel how our healthcare system feels rigged and broken, and that it's absurd that just about a million Coloradans are drowning in medical debt, and that there's in one of the wealthiest states in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, it shouldn't be that way. So that's been a really sort of illuminating part of this project so far.
That's really interesting, and makes me think of a lot of work we've done on Supreme Court corruption and popular perceptions of corruption. People really don't like corruption. It consistently polls as one of the top, 1, 2, 3 issues. We've also done polling that shows that even though people are outraged by stories like we saw over the last couple of years, Justice Thomas taking gifts from billionaires who have business before the courts, you know, RVs, free RVs, and trips to Indonesia, as outrageous as that is, they don't necessarily see the connection to their personal lives, how it's harming them. And what you're saying suggests that those gaps are starting to close, and there's popular public insight into how this broken system is really worsening our lives. How do you think that has developed, and what can we do to draw those connections more clearly? Because it does feel like we've got a completely out of control system. The Supreme Court itself, through its rulings on corruption, have gutted corruption laws. Those aren't even partisan decisions, largely unanimous decisions, making things like, this is, I guess, a partisan one from more recently, but making gratuities, exempt from federal bribery laws as long as you pay somebody the bribe after the fact. It's not a bribe. But so structurally, and then the whole anti-regulatory agenda has let these folks do whatever they want and harm our communities without recourse. What can we do to clarify those connections? Because it does feel really important to do so, especially as Americans, I think, fall into cynicism about the whole system being corrupt. Everybody's corrupt. Why should I even participate? Because that's not what we want either.
Totally. Yeah, look, I mean, I think, let me tell you about a conversation I had and not to say that will always be easy to find this hook with anybody.
No, I think this is the thing. It's like finding these examples that really show it.
Yeah. So an example I like to give, I talk all the time about how I have seen throughout my career that those with wealth and power often play by a different set of rules from the rest of us, right? And describe how that the sort of like that deep unfairness, how it like emerges in sort of real world ways. And one of the examples that I like to give is that the vast majority of working people, through the fine print of their contracts, have been forced to give up their right to hold their boss accountable for wage theft, for discrimination, for collusion that drives down their wages, right? They've like waived the right to go to court, right, through forced arbitration provisions. At the same time, the biggest corporations in the world, these same companies, right, are rushing into any court they want to in the country to dismantle our worker protections, our consumer protections, our environmental protections. The fact that the courts are open to them, right, to engage in this highly politicized deregulatory project at the same time as the courts have been closed for a long time for anybody who is harmed by a corporation that they have a contractual relationship with. That's absurd, right? So I was having this conversation with somebody. I was at a county party picnic, right? Having this conversation and providing that example. And of course, the question is, well, obviously, forced arbitration can't be legal. This is why I love talking. Like when you talk to like non-lawyers about so many of these things, right? That's where you really learn how you can really see the absurdity in it, right? So the reaction of a non-lawyer to forced arbitration is, well, obviously that's not legal. Of course, you can't just tell your employees that they can't sue you. And I explained that, that I didn't think it should be, right? But that is in fact that is in fact the law set down by the Supreme Court in a set of decisions, 5-4 decisions in, from like 2000, from the 1990s through the present. And it was like the reaction was so interesting, like, oh, yes, of course. Yes, this is what the Supreme Court is up to, right? The Supreme Court, yes, is empowering corporations, stripping us of our rights, right? Is engaged in all kinds of corruption. Like, I get it. Like, this is the connection, Yep. And I think that's those conversations, it's going to be harder or easier to have these conversations depending on the context. But I think that the more that we can do to tie these sort of like day-to-day unfairness to the corruption that we're seeing in our legal system and in our democracy, I think that that will give us a shot, right? I mean, I'm sure speaking about. I'm of the opinion that, for example, that speaking about the rule of law in the abstract, right, is not going ultimately to be effective politically at accomplishing what we need to. But
the rule of law, you can't eat the rule of law, And
Yeah.
the rule of law does not get you very much when a 5-4 Supreme Court willfully misreads a federal statute, knowing that the Congress, like the Federal Arbitration Act, knowing that the Congress, which the same interests that put them on the court, is going to do nothing to correct that misreading, and the results will accrue to their benefit and against the people.
The same freaking rule of law that says I can't sue my boss. Like, what kind of rule of law is
Right.
that, right? But I think if we talk about how like the corrosion of our democracy, how it's connected up with real world harms, we've got a shot, and that's been a fun part of the campaign, is doing that, in as many ways as I can, as often as I can.
Amazing. Okay, I want to make sure we leave time for
Sure.
getting into your work at Towards Justice. Tell us about
Sure.
Towards Justice and your litigation strategies, the issues you work on, where you work, and maybe some one or two cases that are exemplary of the type of work you're trying to do.
Absolutely. So, Towards Justice is we're a nonprofit law firm. We're based in Denver. We work around the country to take on mostly litigation on behalf of working people to challenge corporate abuse. We focus on cases that help to move the law, to shape the law, to nudge, that help to change the political discourse, to nudge public enforcement agencies to follow our lead. We actually, the sort of progression of Towards Justice, I think, is really interesting and might teach something, right? So in 2014, when we were founded, we were focused principally on cases involving mostly immigrant workers who had been victims of wage theft in Colorado. We quickly realized that there was like no way we would need an organization 1,000 times bigger than the one we have in order to really make a meaningful dent in that problem, and instead shifted our resources to empowering the state and the city of Denver to take on those wage theft cases, right? Especially because forced arbitration increasingly was not allowing us to tackle those cases through private enforcement. So use policy advocacy to build up a broad and I think one of the best enforcement schemes in the country in Colorado and in the city of Denver, and then shift our litigation resources to cases that the private bar isn't doing and that public enforcers aren't doing, right? So we can help to empower, to focus on empowering working people and also on moving the law in ways that will remedy deep and systemic injustices. Often our work, and I'll provide a couple of examples of this, often we find that some of our most interesting work and our most important work seeks to bridge the divide between different areas of law, right? I think we've got this problem now where, which I think is a function of the compliance work inside major corporations and big law, right? Where there's a lot of focus on sort of complying with one set of laws, and then like sort of trying to skate between all of the others, right? But very often, especially when we've got corporate structures that in many cases seem designed to harm people, we see that even if on the face of these practices they comply with some sets of laws, they may not comply with others. So there's one example of this. In 2017, Donald Trump nominated a guy named Andy Puzder to be the Secretary of Labor. Andy Puzder was the CEO of Carl's Jr. And he used to go around, I think he still sort of does this. He goes around and talks about how we really don't need minimum wage laws like the ones we have, right? The free market will help to ensure that wages go up and working conditions improve. Of course, like working people understand that the market is not close to free. It is rigged in all kinds of ways. And so we started talking to Carl's Jr. workers, right, who described something that we found super interesting, which is that they said that if you worked up within Carl's Jr. at one of Carl's Jr.'s restaurants, which is a franchise model, you work up within one of their franchise restaurants and do everything that they've asked you to do, and you sort of grow your expertise at Carl's Jr. And your boss isn't treating you well, you're not getting paid enough. You can't threaten to go work at another Carl's Jr., right? Even if it's a different franchise owner, because of a provision in the franchise agreement that says that franchisees can't hire each other's workers, right? What we now understand to be a franchise no-poach agreement or franchise no-hire agreement. And I'll tell you, like, you talk to Carl's Jr. workers, they understood immediately that this was unfair and rigged, right? So, one of our clients described how he's like, I couldn't go to he's like, I haven't been to a parent teacher conference in 5 years, right? This is something that struck me, especially because I was a new dad at the time. Like, he's like, I haven't been to a parent teacher conference in 5 years because my schedule is so unfair, right? I've done everything that they told me to do. I have tried they told me that this is the path to the American dream. I'm a mid-level manager at a Carl's Jr. restaurant. I know there's a Carl's Jr. up the street that wants to hire me, but the provision of this contract says that they can't. So Carl's Jr. argues, and like many fast food franchise companies, argues that it is not the employer of all of the employees of the various franchisees, right? They say, no, these are totally separate and independent entities because it doesn't want to be on the hook for the employment violations. It doesn't want to be on the hook when there's sexual harassment or discrimination. And we argued that it couldn't have its cake and eat it too, right? You can control what restaurant somebody works at, right? If you are if you're their boss, if you're their employer, if you take responsibility for them, right? But you can't control them, right, as this sort of like independent entity. And if you do that, right, if you facilitate this no-poach agreement, then you're violating the antitrust laws, right? It's one or the other. You're either violating the antitrust laws, or you're on the hook as the employer, and you've argued you're not the employer, and so you violate the antitrust laws. That case ultimately spurred public enforcement around the country. The Washington AG's office had entered into several settlements with big fast food franchise agreements. There's a lot of private enforcement, and recent data suggests that as a consequence of the removal of franchise no-poach agreements from fast food franchise contracts, wages for fast food workers in some places have gone up by like 6%, right? So we see that as sort of a massive success, and as a illustration of how our model can work to empower people and take on these sort of systemic problems. Yeah. If you allow me real briefly, another case that which I think is another one of these, like, you can't have it both ways. PetSmart. In California, PetSmart had this thing. Great one. I heard you talking about that. They call it a training repayment agreement, or which we call a training repayment agreement provision, which said that the minimum wage workers, the groomers who worked grooming pets at PetSmart, that if they left their job before the end of their purported commitment period, then they had to pay back the cost of their training, several $1,000s, right? These are minimum wage workers for whom the several $1,000s is like a devastating threat. And in fact, we talked to a lot of people who had left, and their credit had been harmed, and they've been chased by debt collectors. This debt was indenturing people, and ultimately following people around for many, many years. So we argued in that case that PetSmart also couldn't have it both ways, right? If the training that they purported to provide, if that training was on-the-job training for their benefit, right, then it was a kickback against wages. That seeking to recoup the debt was a kickback against wages. You were saying, you pay us for the training we provide to you as part of our responsibility as an employer. If the training was not for their benefit as an employer, and was really for the benefit of them as employees, right, then they were providing a kind of like shady private higher education program, right? That was, like, from our perspective, deeply predatory and unlicensed, right? So either you're an unlicensed provider of this training for the benefit of the employee, or you're an employer seeking a kickback against wages. Lots of other cases to talk about, and I could go on forever, but those are some examples.
Well, it's really helpful too, just to have those back to back, to sort of like see how you think about these issues systemically, structurally, not just in terms of the structural impediments to fairness and equal justice, but in terms of a systemic response, right? Doing this litigation that provides broad-based relief, that provides templates for offices like attorneys general offices to start to change things for the better on a broader basis. And we're seeing this as a big fight in terms of access to justice right now under Trump. Obviously, in the immigration context, there's this effort to push all, efforts to seek habeas relief or other declaration of rights through an individualized process. It's just so essential that we have this kind of structural analysis and structural broad-based relief. And, it strikes me, just to close things out, that it sets you up really nicely to take over that role as AG, having been in the trenches with the people that this stuff really affects. And that's what an attorney general is for. So wish you really the best of luck in your campaign. I know it's a ton of work. It must be a slog as you're also doing your full-time job of running this important law firm. David Seligman, thank you for joining us here on Midas Touch Legal AF with Court Accountability. Folks, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel here. Click that like and subscribe button below. Check out David's website. It's Seligman for AG, if I'm not mistaken.
SeligmanForAG.com. Seligman for FOR. Not, I don't do this like not the number 4. I don't, you know what I mean? Like I've lost all, you have to give up a lot of dignity in running for office, but I'm not going to go that far, SeligmanForAG.com.
Keep your Oxford commas. And then where can folks find Towards Justice?
At towardsjustice.org, TOWARDS.
Okay, wonderful. We'll make sure we'll throw those links in the notes below. Thank you all for joining us. Make sure to check out David's work. David, we'd love to have you back as the campaign progresses, as things heat up in Colorado and elsewhere. Really appreciate what you're doing.
I'd love to come back as often as you'll have me. So thanks so much.
Okay. Until next time, stay mad, stay motivated, stay mighty. Signing off.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.